I'm delighted today to be speaking with Neil Rackham, who's visiting us from the US and has something of a very long and serious career in the area of sales. Hello, Neil. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
So, Neil, in the world of the internet, clearly sales has changed and is changing. You, I know, have coined a phrase called spin selling. Could you tell us a little bit about that and how we might use it in our work?
Okay. Let me say, what spin selling is, it's a lot of research into some 35,000 sales calls, biggest piece of research ever done in selling. And what we set about to do there was to understand what successful salespeople were doing that was different from the average salesperson.
Okay.
We watched 35,000 salespeople.
Fine. Well, you must have learned a lot.
Yeah, it took us 12 years.
Right.
We had 40 researchers on it. It was a mammoth project. We published a whole lot of books from it.
Right.
The spin piece that everyone knows about was a sequence of questions that effective people ask when they sell.
Right.
And put very simply, when you're discussing something with a customer, the first thing is questions are more important than anything else.
Right.
So sales calls with a lot of questions are more successful than sales calls without.
Okay. So stop the selling, ask questions
That's
at the
right.
beginning. Yep.
Yeah, ask questions, listen. But what kinds of questions? There's clearly smart questions and dumb questions.
Right.
We used to be taught that open questions were the smart ones and closed questions were the dumb
Yep.
ones.
So let your client just keep on rambling, but you're saying that's not the way it is now?
Well, no, we did $250,000 worth of research to try to prove that distinction. We couldn't prove it.
Right.
But what we found instead is there's a sequence of questions that effective people use. First, they ask some fact-finding questions, what we call situation questions,
Okay.
the S of spin.
Right.
Second thing that they do is they ask about problems. You know, every product,
Right.
everyone who's watching this has something in common. We all solve problems for our customers. If
Sure.
you don't solve a problem,
What are you doing?
what are you doing? So how can you solve problems unless you ask about them?
Yep.
And so the second type of question is what we call problem questions. Questions like, are you finding it difficult to do this? Questions about, is this a problem? Those
So
questions,
problems also, the wording you're using there are eliciting sort of responses that are yes questions. So we want our prospects to say, yes, they've got those problems,
yeah,
presumably.
we want to discover how they see the problem. Because it doesn't matter how we see it.
Yep.
If the customer doesn't feel they have a problem, they don't have a
Yeah,
problem.
there's no selling to be done.
So
Okay.
basically we're asking customers about their problems. And people, as they become more experienced in selling, get better and better at doing that.
Yep.
Unfortunately, this is where it stops. For most people, they'll ask some fact-finding or situation questions.
Yep.
They'll ask some problem questions. And the customer says, yeah, okay, that's a problem.
Right.
And then they say, oh, let me tell you about how we could solve it for you.
Okay. And that's not the right way.
That's not the right
Ah,
way.
okay.
That's
So what's the I then?
It's what most people do. There's
Okay.
really smart people ask the I question. The I question we call implication questions. They're questions like, if you don't solve that problem, what's going to happen?
Okay.
What's that problem costing you in these other areas?
Yep.
So they take the problem, they peel it back.
Right.
They make it more
So
significant.
deepening the pain as well for the
They
person on the
deepen
other
the
end.
pain. Yeah.
Okay. Right.
And then there's a final type of question, which I wish we'd called value questions,
Right.
which would have given us the acronym SPIV.
Which would be ideal.
Which, as we'll know here in Australia or in the UK, a SPIV is someone who comes up to you and says,
very flashy
want to
and-
buy a stolen watch? You know?
Yeah.
So it was a bit down market.
Right.
In the States, as it happens, that doesn't mean anything. And,
Okay.
So I wish I'd used the term V for value,
Okay.
because the final type of question is about value.
Right.
But we call them need payoff questions,
Okay.
because that gave us the SPIN acronym.
Yeah.
These are questions like, how would it help you to be able to do this? Why is that important? What else could this do for you?
So again, getting the prospect to articulate in their own words what life looks like when they've got your product or service. Yeah.
Because after all, if I tell you, look, here are the 3 benefits of my product, I appear pushy.
Yeah.
I'm forcing you.
Yes.
If I say, what benefits do you see? I'm getting you to think about how I could help you.
Fantastic. So that explains the acronym SPIN. And if we want to find out more about your work, we go to a website locally, which is www.huthwaite,
Yes.
spelled HUTHWAITE.com.au.
You've got it.
Okay, Neil, thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you.
Today I'm going to talk to you about spin selling, the best questioning technique process I've ever come across. I've been using it for more than a decade. You're going to love it. All right, what's the challenge that most salespeople have? Well, the biggest one is that most of us don't understand the difference between a one-call sort of low-value sale versus one of those complex sales. If you're in the business where your customers have to interact with you, multiple times over, the course of maybe a week, 2 weeks, or even longer, you're in a complex sale environment. And sales has changed so much over the years, and people know, like I've said in some previous videos, they can smell when you're trying to sell to them. So today we're going to talk about spin selling. Now, spin selling has been around, it's by a guy named Neil Rackham. It's been around for since 1988, actually, and I have the book and I've been using it for years, and I love the process of being able to go through these questioning techniques with potential clients. And you can use this in any industry that you're in. And SPIN really just stands for situation, problem, implication, and need payoff. And I'm going to go through those in detail in the blog post, so make sure you read through it and really go through it. It's a lot, well, I think it's a lot of fun. So the different questions mean just sort of the different level of salesperson that you're going to be. The first one, the situational kind of question would be, tell me about the current situation that you're in, or tell me about what's going on in your business, or what type of a sales process do you use. So if it was me, I would say, can you explain to me the sales process that you use in your business? And that's what most salespeople do, is they ask those questions and they try and dig and they try and probe for information, which is sort of the old school way of doing it. As you start to go further into the discussion, you want to start asking problem questions. So if I'm asking, tell me about your sales process, and they explain to me what's going on, then I would ask a question like, so why is this causing you problems right now? Or what problems has this caused for you, right? So that's a problem question, and most salespeople that are good in those low volume or low value kind of sales are good at asking those kind of problem questions and digging deeper, and that's what probing is all about. And for most people, they'll be able to get by on those two levels of question. But really where the value is on the third and fourth level. So the first one is that implication question. You ask about a problem, they're going to tell you what that problem is, and there's always going to be some sort of an implied need. And when you're paying attention to that sales language, you'll be able to spot that implied need. And the question then becomes, what happens if you don't fix this problem? And you get them to explain to you how that problem sort of builds on itself. And it's the more you ask those implication kind of questions, the deeper that you can actually dig into your conversation. So if I was going to ask an implication question, I would say something like, what happens if you don't tighten up your sales process, or what happens if you don't start getting these conversions in order? So that's an implication question, getting your customer to start thinking about where would this go. And if they start telling you more implied needs, then you can actually dig further in those implications. The last one is the need payoff question. Now this is where you can really do some cool stuff with your customer. And the need payoff is, tell me what would happen if we increased your sales by, say, 25%. What would next year look like if you had another 25% in sales? Or what would another 10% more time freedom be for you? Or what would it look like if you had a 95% increase in your customer satisfaction ratings? Now you're talking about solutions rather than problems. And the beauty about this is that when you get your customers involved in explaining to you how a solution will solve their needs, you actually empower them to become sort of a mini salesperson for supporting your cause. And they become sort of evangelists for what you're trying to do, especially if they have to go and sell this idea to somebody else. As I mentioned in the blog post, the spouse factor, going home and talking to a husband, or talking to your wife, or going and having to talk to your boss, superior, or the management team. The need payoff question is really going to get them involved in coming up with a solution. And it doesn't necessarily mean that they're ready to buy your solution, just that a solution is in order. So those are the 4 types of questions that you can ask. And the better you get at asking the further ones, the problems, implication, and need payoff, the faster you're going to be able to succeed in some of these sales calls. So get good at asking those kind of questions. Remember that spin selling, when it was released, it was based on 12 years of research on 35,000 sales calls in all sorts of different complex sale environments. So this stuff is really rooted in science and in data, which I love because they tested, and they found those gaps in the sales process. So in your sales process, make sure you're testing ideas. Make sure that you're testing what works and what doesn't, and start to work on asking those deeper questions. Most amateur salespeople stop at situation or even at problem because they haven't thought further about how to ask those questions. And then what do? We ask a couple situation questions, our customers get bored with that process, so we drop our marketing material in front of them and say, okay, well, let's look at our solution. That's completely what's losing so many sales today. So I hope this helps you guys out. Tomorrow I'm going to talk about an even more powerful sales technique called a challenger sale, which I've used a lot as well. So I look forward to your comments and questions, and read through the blog post and let me know how I can help you with your sales.
Each investigative call demands a range of skills from the seller, and one of those skills is investigating. Spin is an extremely flexible process for investigating while conducting a sales call. There is no one right way to use spin. However, there are 3 strategies that you can employ to help you use the spin process to your full advantage. The first strategy for the effective use of spin involves focusing on the right problems. These are the areas that resonate with the customer and that provide the greatest opportunity for need development. Be careful not to ask questions to develop a problem you can't address. You need a clear understanding of the problems your products and services can solve, and a clear understanding of which potential customer problems have the highest probability of existing in a specific customer situation. This will help you select problem areas that are important to the customer. The ability to pick productive problem areas involves product knowledge, market knowledge, competitive knowledge, and customer knowledge. It also involves planning, which should be done before each call. The second strategy for using spin involves listening to the customer and adapting your approach. Some sellers take the approach of developing one explicit need at a time. After developing the need, they explain how their solution could satisfy that need before proceeding on to develop the next one. Other sellers try to identify all of the customer problems first, then make selective use of implication and need payoff questions for those problems they feel have the most potential and highest priority. Still, other sellers try to uncover as many explicit needs as they can before talking about solutions. They find this helpful in putting together a total solution that substantially addresses all of the customer's needs. The key is to adjust your approach as necessary to meet specific customer needs and situations. For example, if the customer is giving you solid, useful information about multiple problems or needs, let the customer talk. Don't interrupt just because you like to deal with one need at a time. Encourage the customer to keep talking and take notes if necessary to help you remember what the customer has said. On the other hand, if you generally like to get all the problems or explicit needs out on the table before discussing solutions, remember the saying, you have to give information to get information. Only a very patient customer will answer question after question without insisting on some discussion of solutions. Be prepared to discuss solutions, or at least partial solutions, if the customer starts to become restless and before the customer loses interest. Once you've provided some information, you can make the transition back to questioning. The final strategy for using spin is focusing on problem solving and avoiding the interrogation dynamic. One way to do this is to vary the ways in which you ask your questions and avoid repetition of the same phrases. If you constantly begin every question with phrases like, "Is it a problem when?" or "Would it help if?" it can become very tedious. In addition, to keep things conversational, let the customer know that you are listening by paraphrasing important statements they make or by asking clarifying questions. Let's watch an example of how this is done.
So the problems aren't limited to one area, but affect the whole organization. Is that what you're saying?
Yes, I'm afraid that's right.
Remember, to get the most out of using spin, you should focus on the right problems, listen to the customer, and focus on problem solving versus interrogation.
Hey friends, David Shirey, author of the soon-to-be-released book, Rare Confidence. It's going to be out this fall on Amazon.com. Listen, spin selling is an outstanding study of the world's greatest salespeople. It's not one person's opinion on how to sell. Rather, it's a study over time of thousands of highly successful salespeople, and it's the findings of what makes them tick and what are those activities that they all share that they do that helps them become successful. And one of the things we can learn from them is the 4 stages of sales as spin selling defines it. Which one of them is the most important? Now those 4 stages are the opening or the initial contact, the hook. Number 2 is the investigation phase, where you go out and you find out all you can about your prospect in order to be able to sell specifically to them. The 3rd stage in spin selling is your demonstration of your product or company's product or services capabilities, what the benefits are to them if they use your company's product or service. And number 4 is the close. So which one do you think should you be spending absolutely the majority of your time on? Give up? Well, unquestionably, it's on the investigation phase. Now, if I were to show you a diagram, it would look something like this. The opening would be a relatively small circle where I'm reaching out to you and I'm grabbing you and it's the hook and I'm getting you interested to talk to me to move forward. But then the next phase, the investigation phase, the circle would be like this. It would be ginormous because that's where you have to find out everything that it is about this organization. And if you ask them all the right questions, they're going to tell you exactly how to sell them. Then the next circle, your demonstration of capability, which you do based on the investigation phase, well, that circle would kind of look like this. Bigger than the opening, but much smaller than the investigation phase. And as we've talked about a number of times in the past, the close is as simple as boom. It's just a simple little dot. Boom. Makes sense to me. What do you think? Well, that makes sense to me. What do you think? Hey, listen, I'm now traveling across America, speaking to organizations on both sales and confidence. I'm working with companies to help them realize new growth strategies, and I'm also coaching executives to higher performance. For more info on how to get a hold of me and what I can do to help you, go to davidshirey.com.
Each investigative call demands a range of skills from the seller, and one of those skills is called opening. Every call begins with certain preliminaries, introductions, an exchange of pleasantries, social discussion, and an opening related to the business at hand. Huthwaite research shows that there is no particular correlation between the way a sales call is opened and the outcome of that call. In other words, there is no single right way to open a sales call. The purpose of your call opening is to make a smooth and effective transition into investigating so that you can uncover explicit needs and address them with the benefits of your product or service. Here are some guidelines to help you open your calls more effectively. Be flexible. You won't open every call the same way. It depends on factors such as who the customer is, how well you know the customer, who arranged the meeting, what the time constraints are, and who else is participating in the call. Establish a customer-centered purpose. Focus on the customer's concerns in order to give that customer a reason to answer your questions. Get down to business quickly. While you have to respect social, business, and cultural norms, you don't want to waste the customer's time. As a general rule, make your opening as brief as possible. An effective way of opening most calls is to first link back to earlier conversations or events that led up to that call. Then state a purpose for your current call and either ask a question or ask for explicit permission to ask questions. Let's watch some examples.
Hi, Michael. Thanks for taking the time to meet with me today.
I'm glad to see you today. Come on in, please, have a seat. I'm anxious to hear about your new products.
When we spoke on the telephone, you mentioned there were some problems with your system. I'd like to explore these with you and see how we might be able to help. May I ask you some questions about your current system?
Now let's watch an example of a telephone call opening.
Hello, Marcia. John Smith mentioned that you were looking for creative solutions. This is Brandon with Network Solutions, and I'd like to help. So could you tell me a little bit more about what you have in mind?
If your openings are flexible, customer-centered, and brief, you should be able to make a smooth and effective transition into the investigating stage of the sales call. The most successful sellers are perceived as consultative resources by their customers, as problem solvers working in the customer's best interests. In order to be seen as an effective problem solver, you must first be able to develop a clear understanding of the customer's problems. You can develop this understanding through the skillful use of problem questions. Problem questions are designed to identify customer problems, difficulties, or dissatisfaction which can be addressed by your product or service. Customer problems, difficulties, or dissatisfaction are the raw material for building explicit needs. They are the reasons why a customer might have the desire for change. Huthwaite research shows that problem questions are much more powerful than situation questions. Customers are invariably more interested in discussing their problems than in educating the seller on the bland basics of their business situation. There are two basic types of problem questions. The first type of problem question helps you uncover customer problems, difficulties, or dissatisfaction. Sometimes customers will freely reveal their problems without any prompting from you. At other times, you will have to ask questions designed to uncover problems and determine whether or not a specific problem might exist. One way to do this is to use a very simple, direct probing question. For example, what problems has that system created for you? Or, have you ever had a problem managing large files? Or, how happy are you with the way that system handles large files? Another way to uncover problems is to soften the questions somewhat by positioning them with information. For example, I've talked with quite a few people who have used that system, and many of them have said that they had difficulties with large files. Has that been a problem for you? Or, from what I've seen, many firms in your industry have had problems with large files. What is your experience in that regard? Or, I've dealt with a number of firms that were in the same situation as yours. Most of them said that processing large files was their biggest problem. Is that the case here? Asking simple, direct questions, or softer, positioned ones, is really a matter of opinion and style. There is no evidence to suggest that either approach yields better results. So use the approach that best suits the individual customer, the particular situation, and your own personal style. The second type of problem questions helps you understand customer problems, difficulties, or dissatisfaction. While it is important to determine whether the customer has a problem, this isn't enough. You must also have a good understanding of the problem. You gain this understanding by asking questions. The questions you ask to understand the problem include who, what, when, where, why, how much, how many, and how often. For example, who has to deal with the problem? What is causing it? When did it start? Where is it occurring? Why do you think it is happening? How much of your production is involved? How many locations are affected? How often does it happen? With a clear understanding of the customer's problem, you are better able to assess the scope of the problem, determine how to best position potential solutions, and determine what to do next in the selling process. By asking follow-up problem questions, you help the customer think through and clarify the problem. In many instances, you'll find that customers have not fully analyzed their problems. They might not have the time, information, or resources to do so. By helping customers to really understand their problems, you position yourself as a problem solver and consultative resource. Asking problem questions will also help you to develop the customer's desire for a solution and a sense of urgency to act on the problem. Sometimes the customer will reveal a problem which your product or service cannot solve. In this case, be judicious in your use of follow-up problem questions. Your focus should be on developing problems which can be addressed by your product or service. Almost all sellers have a good understanding of their products and services. However, the most successful sellers have something more, a very clear understanding of the customer's problems, difficulties, or dissatisfaction which can be addressed by each of their products and services. In other words, they have business, industry, and operational knowledge as well as product knowledge. This knowledge is critical to selling success. The better you understand the problems you can address from a customer's point of view, the better you will be able to uncover and understand specific problems and develop explicit needs. The most successful sellers do a great deal of planning before a call. They anticipate potential customer problems and formulate problem questions they might ask during the call. In other words, they put their business, operational, and product knowledge to good use before the call. While the less successful sellers may be inclined to wing it, the most successful sellers understand the value of solid, thorough preparation. Anticipating customer problems takes time and careful thought, because specific problems can vary greatly from customer to customer. Most problems tend to fall into one of the following categories: profitability, cost, productivity, competition, quality, time, ease of operation, reliability, capability, credibility, versatility, safety, morale, customer satisfaction, and reputation or image. These categories can be a useful frame of reference for organizing the problems that can be addressed by your product or service. When anticipating problems, the most successful sellers recognize that a customer's perception of problems can vary depending on the level or function of the person being contacted. For example, top executives might tend to be more interested in problems related to profitability, productivity, or competition. The actual users of your product or service might have a greater interest in problems related to ease of operation, versatility, safety, or reliability. Customers in the finance function tend to focus more on problems related to cost, profitability, etc. Unlike their less successful counterparts, the most successful sellers focus on anticipating problems that are likely to be hot buttons for the level or function they are contacting.
Okay, welcome. My name is John Golden. I'm President and CEO of Huthwaite, and I'm delighted today to be here with Neil Rackham, who is indeed the founder of Huthwaite, the author of Spin Selling, and one of the most sought-after sales consultants and speakers in the world today. So welcome, Neil.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
And congratulations on your recent doctorate that was awarded to you about a month ago, I think.
Oh, yes, yes. With a funny hat and silly robes and things. It was wonderful.
So as you travel around the world extensively, you're making speeches and talking to people, what are some of the messages that you're hearing and the things that you're hearing from business leaders that are similar regardless of where you go?
Well, I think the first thing is, it was always said that if there's a recession in America, if America sneezes, the rest of the world gets a cold. The rest of the world probably has swine flu at the moment. I was in Chile yesterday, And one of the things that was very, very clear there is that, like many, many other economies, is deeply down. In fact, I think the only exception at the moment is India, which has such a strong internal economy that you don't see anything very different. But in most countries, this is the big one.
So the recession is even deeper and more global in nature than previous recessions. So is your advice about selling in hard times the same, or has it changed for this particular recession?
I think there are some differences, but fundamentally, good selling is good selling. So it doesn't matter too much whether we're talking about good times or bad. In bad times, you just have to be more skillful. You have to be more focused, and yet those are exactly the same things which would help you in good times as well.
So a lot of people are obviously suffering from acute price pressure, as they always do when markets turn down. And obviously it's even more acute this time around. So what advice would you have for people to mitigate against that price conversation?
Well, I think we can learn a lot from what happened in the last big global recession, which was in the 1980s. There, most companies felt that the real issue was price. They were being pressured by customers on price, price, and price. There was one company worldwide which stood out against that, and that was IBM. IBM products in the 80s were underfeatured and overpriced. And where competitors were making cuts of something like 30%, IBM actually increased prices on key lines. Because what IBM sold was not price, but safety. I mean, you may remember the old marketing slogan of IBM in the 80s was, nobody ever got fired for choosing IBM. That's about safety, it's not about price. The result was that whereas competitors cut and went out of business, no one's heard today of Burroughs, Unisys, or DEC. Major companies have all gone. IBM increased its margins, increased its profitabilities, and had some of its best years in history because what it sold was safety, not price. So essentially, in hard times, people would rather make the safe decision than the cheap decision. And we have to train our salespeople to be able to project the idea that we are the safe pair of hands. If you can do that, you can really survive.
Are there any specific mistakes that you see salespeople making, particularly in this market?
The first one is that in any sale, there's some element of negotiation, as Hathwaite knows full well with all the work you do in the negotiating area. But every piece of research shows that the most effective salespeople negotiate very late in the sales process. Unfortunately, when times are hard, people tend to negotiate much earlier. When you negotiate early, you not only reduce your margins, but you create suspicion in customers. You make them feel that if you're negotiating from meeting one, you're going to give even more concessions than you would otherwise give, and you actually reduce your chances of getting the business. So helping people negotiate late rather than get into premature negotiation is tremendously important.
So given the fact that over the last number of years, during the boom years, a lot of people have been very successful selling who may not actually have had the fundamental selling skills because it's been a high demand, easy budget, people know what they want. So now that has all changed, do you think that spin is more applicable and more relevant than ever?
Yes, because good selling matters. There were so many people, the people who I call talking brochures, who thought their job was just go out and show what a great product we had. Those people succeeded moderately, not really well, but moderately when times were good, because there were customers ready to buy and they could cream off some of those customers. But now we live in times where unless the salesperson can create a lot of customer value, the customer's not going to buy, then that takes skill. And salespeople without skill are dying like flies right now. And the hardest thing for most companies is to find good salespeople who can handle these hard times as smoothly as they handle the good times.
So it's always very tempting when there's a downturn in the market for people to sit around and just wait for the market to turn again and think that, okay, when the market turns, everything will go back to normal and I'll be okay. But history has taught us that when markets go through a convulsion and a cycle like this, they come out very different from how they were before. So what impact do you think that's going to have on the salesperson of the future?
Mm-hmm. I think there are two things. One is this recession is not just going to go away. All the indicators I see as I travel around the world is it's at the least going to be a slow recovery and a rather long recovery. But the other thing, you start off saying, people can't just sit around. But I think in that, there's one of the mistakes people make when times are hard. And that is, when times are hard, people get active. They get energetic. They knock on more doors. They try to open up more opportunities. It seems the right thing to do. But the evidence is that that's not what the best people do. That the people who are most successful are the ones who focus. In fact, I have a rule, and my rule would be this. If you wouldn't chase a piece of business in good times, never chase it in bad times. See, that's not just a question of selling skill, that's a question of the whole management approach to thinking about their sales effort. Don't go for activity. Coming out of the recession, the people who will win are the ones who choose the best opportunities and they over-resource them. If you can get people doing that, it will help them move out of these recessive times. Because I think they're going to be longer than the optimists have predicted, maybe not quite so bad as the worst of the pessimists have said, but it's going to be a long, hard one, and it will make all the difference if people have the right strategies and the right skills.
So as you talk to business leaders and advise them, what advice are you giving them about how to position themselves best for the recovery, when it comes or however long it takes? What advice are you giving them?
I think the first piece of advice is now is probably the best time for the last 20 years for recruiting good people. You're not going to make a great boom in sales right now, but if you've got pockets deep enough to ride it, now's the best time to get talented and creative people. They're more mobile than ever before. They can be attracted in, and the price premium isn't anything like as high as it used to be. So staff up with good people would be my first piece of advice. After all, sales is unique, In almost any other area, a top performer may perform 5% better or 10% better than an average performer. In the average major sales force, the top performer, the top 10%, are outselling the bottom 10% by a factor that nearly always exceeds 3 to 1. If you can get more of that top 10% into your sales force, it's a very good growth strategy for getting out. Now's a good time to employ it. The other thing is redeploy your resources. Look hard at the kind of business you want to win. Get marketing and sales to work together to identify where are the segments where we could really make an inroad. What are the individual opportunities we should chase? If you can do that, you can do very well climbing out of this recession faster than your competitors will ever do.
So if there was one area that you would have sales leaders really focus on right now, what area would that be?
I think the first thing is it takes a cool head. A sales leader cannot panic. One of the things which tends to happen is when there's panic at a senior management level, it's amazing how that transmits itself down to customers. Sales managers become more anxious. They pressure their salespeople more, salespeople pressure customers, and the whole thing cascades. Remember that I was saying earlier, selling safety is much more important than selling price. How does a salesperson make a customer feel this is a safe decision? It's more than anything a matter of confidence. Helping the customer feel we know where we're going, we're steady, we're professional, we're not panicking. So if I had one piece of advice to give senior management, it would be make in your behavior and the behavior of sales managers, make it clear that we are riding this one out by thought, by strategy, and not just by panic and by activity.
So as a behavioral psychologist, I mean, you know how people operate and the way they think and behave, both buyers and sellers. So what would be your advice for somebody trying to make their next big sale and alternatively somebody looking to make their next big purchase?
I'd say in each case, the crucial thing today is that there's been a transformation which the recession has rather overlaid so we don't notice how big the transformation was. The role of the salesperson's fundamentally changed. And it's not changed in a way that matches the changes in purchasing. Purchasing has become unimaginably more focused, more professional in the last 10 or 15 years. Sales still has a way to go. Purchasers are demanding, quite rightly, salespeople who don't waste their time. Salespeople who've got something useful to say. In other words, salespeople who can create customer value. We live in an era where the products don't cut it. Your product isn't sufficiently different from that of your competitors to just get the business for you. The salesperson adds as much value and sometimes more value than the product. So the advice I would give to salespeople is understand that you are a value creator, not a value communicator. Develop with customers a deep understanding of their problems and issues. And of course, as Huthwaite's research and other research over the last 40 years has shown over and over and over again, down at that tactical level, you do it by asking good questions to really understand customers. Because selling today is not about persuasion, it's about understanding.
So Neil, would you still recommend sales as a good career for people to get into?
Well, I think it is for a couple of reasons. If you'd asked me 15 or 20 years ago, in fact, many young, ambitious MBAs used to ask me that when I was teaching on MBA programs, should I go into sales? I'd say no. Go into finance, go into marketing, because those were the people who were making the impact. But there has been a fundamental change in what makes impact in terms of a company's growth. 20 years ago, a company used to grow by becoming more efficient internally. It was the era of efficiency. You'd introduce processes, you'd slim it down, you'd bring in quality. But all those things have been done. So then we entered the era of acquisition, where CEOs grew by acquiring another company. So if you acquire a company half your size, your sales have gone up 50%. And so acquisition became the way to be a rock star CEO. Well, there's no capital for acquisition now, and many people are very skeptical about it. So now we're entering the era of organic growth. And companies are growing by working to take business from their competitors, bringing marketing and sales together. And that means that marketing and sales have become very important functions. In the last year, I've had 3 firms of major headhunters come to me and ask if I could recommend a CEO for a Fortune 500 company who has a background in sales. That's not happened to me before. So I think we're entering a new era where sales and marketing become the way in which companies are going to grow. And so few senior executives know enough about selling. And I think there's a wonderful career opportunity for smart, ambitious people in sales today.
So in conclusion, what's the final piece of advice that you would have for people out there who are desperately looking for some nuggets of wisdom as they wait for this market to turn around?
Mm-hmm. I think I'd put it very simply, over-resource your best opportunities. You get no prize for coming in second. The crucial thing is if you're going to invest in trying to build a customer today, it's going to be a big investment, and you want to make sure you're going to win. And you do that by thinking, by strategizing, by choosing the opportunity where you think you have the best chance of winning. Remember what I was saying earlier. If you wouldn't chase the business in good times, never chase it in bad. Choose your best opportunities and put twice the effort into half the opportunities, and you'll win. And that's what you need to do.
Well, thanks, Neil. It's been a real pleasure talking with you this morning, and
Well,
look
thank you,
forward
John.
to talking to you again soon.
Yes, thank you.